marshmallows and settle in for this compilation of campfire horror stories. I've been a national park ranger for close to 2 decades. Protocols have changed a lot in that time. I write this just to try to keep people safe for the next time you venture to the big outdoors. Let me tell you about the last park I worked. I can't be too specific about the location for my job's sake. Anyway, we had clusters of campsites that we rotated annually. The idea was to prevent one group from getting overused and worn down, let nature regrow a bit. The winter had just passed, and our big summer season was a few months away. I'm sent out to check the suitability of the campsites to decide which ones need time to recover and which ones we can open up. Winters here are cold. Not too many people camp during the winter, aside from rugged masochists and Boy Scout troops led by people who believe they are rugged masochists. I didn't expect to find much out of the ordinary. The first site was clear and ready to go. As I'm trekking to the next site, I see what looks like some debris and junk down a ways in a river valley. Looks like some jackass set up an unauthorized camp down there. Usually, when that happens, they leave garbage and smoldering fires. This is going to be a pain to clear up. I approach, seeing the telltale wreckage of what must have been one hell of a party. Shit scattered everywhere, the skeletons of tents still raised up, and blood. I stop, and time stops with me. Pools of blood are spread out along the ground, next to signs of something heavy being dragged into the brush. I pull my radio off my belt and pause. I then pull my Glock 22 out of my holster and rack one round. I'm a certified law enforcement officer, but I haven't had to use my gun in a long time. I quickly look around for any movement, then get on my radio and call in for backup. While I wait, I listen. Silence. Silence in nature isn't good. Prey get quiet when they sense a predator. I hope all the birds are being still on my account. I edge forward slowly, looking for anyone or anything. A shredded plastic cooler, a tent that has been annihilated, with more blood splashed on the walls and inside. People died here. I know it. You can't lose that much blood and just walk off. But no people. Shreds of clothes and a little viscera drawing all the damn flies here. But no people. I've seen bears rummage through camps and destroy anything that looked edible. There are wild hogs here that cut trails through the deep brush and are even more dangerous than the bears. But this isn't either of them. The devastation here, it's just too much. Some scourge of God came through here and just ripped everything to pieces. Finally, backup arrives, and I'm sent to report to HQ. They even brought medics out here. I don't know why. There's no one here to save. One of the new recruits vomits at the scene. I'm glad to get the hell out of here. I get back, and HQ is abuzz. Only 4 people work here, but calls are ringing, printers printing, and the air feels electrified. The manager sees me and signals me to his office. He's pale, ashen-looking, with bloodshot eyes. I sit down by his desk, and he goes to the door and locks it. I've never seen him lock that door. He asks me what I saw. I tell him, uninterrupted. He looks even paler afterward, and his hands tremble a bit. There's a very long pause, and I expect more questions. He doesn't ask any. I leave, then hear the door lock behind me. After a few minutes, I hear him call someone up, and a long, low conversation ensues. I never see him again. Word comes down from on high. We're assigned a new manager, one who excels at what he calls crises. His first order of business, a controlled burn of the unauthorized camp and the sites closest to it. I'm not arguing. I watch the smoke rise in the distance and pray that's the end of it. New orders. Relocate the existing campsites closer to HQ. Before we do that, We take out a few trail cameras at the new locations just to make sure it's not in the middle of a nesting ground. We put up a few cameras pointed at the hog trails through the brush for good measure. A couple days pass, and we go out to collect the footage. The new manager takes it all and starts studying it in his office. A couple hours into reviewing, he freaks out, starts screaming and yelling. He gets on the phone, calling up the line, spitting more obscenities. He spends the rest of the day and that night in the office, calling up specialists and planners. The next morning I show up for a meeting. The manager doesn't look like he slept. Massive changes afoot. He lays out new plans, including massively bright lampposts circling the park border, as well as floodlights around the ranger station. Campsites need to be moved even closer in. Clear lines of sight from the light, if possible. I butt in, telling him that defeats the point of going camping if you're just going on a short walk through the grass, then setting up so close you can see the parking lot. He tells me to shut up, that it's just the start. The park now closes at sundown, sharp. Also, we're now required to have a long gun on our person at all times. Now, it isn't uncommon for rangers to carry an AR-15 or a Remington 870 shotgun going out in the deep woods. There are wild and rabid animals out there. The real concern are massive pot growers. These aren't your chill neighbor who hides a few plants behind the tomatoes. They run the spectrum from large-scale suppliers who like their privacy and dislike law enforcement to anti-government crazies who think we have no right over them. The true patriots. Both groups have a few common points. They tend to be well-armed, they do not like lawmen, and they won't shy away from taking a pot shot at some dumb poor ranger who finds himself in their fields. Keep in mind, Elliot Ness, Mr. I fought Al Capone in one, got scared off busting up Appalachian moonshiners because they constantly sniped at him in the foothills. They shoot to kill. Those are the reasons we keep the big guns around, not routine patrols. I drew the short straw and got the overnight shift. The manager tells me more changes to protocol will be listed when I return. Overnights used to be easy. Monitor the radio, bust up the parties if needed, check for poachers if they're operating nearby, make sure the forest doesn't burn down. I clock in and, per instructions, go to the gun cage. Things have changed. Our shotguns have new rifled barrels so they can handle the solid slugs we've been issued. That's the kind of firepower you want to take down a charging bear. God forbid you ever need it. The AR-15s have been stepped up too. The old 15-round magazines have been replaced by 30-round ones. Someone even snuck us in hollow point rounds. It makes no damn sense. Shooting in the woods, you need full metal jacket ammo so the rounds don't go wild when they touch a twig. Hollow points just exist to do more tissue damage. This is ridiculous. This is overkill. We're not a war zone. We don't need this firepower. Next to the radio, there are new instructions. Now we're not allowed to directly respond to emergency calls. We can reply, figure out what the issue is, then we report to a new phone number I don't recognize. Time passes slowly tonight. I'm not even allowed to leave the building until sunup. A few uneventful nights pass. The new floodlights and lampposts are frying my eyes. It's so bright out there, a blind man could see. A week later, some kids roll into the lot. They grab their backpacks and start hiking up the ridge. I know what they're up to. No one has booked a campsite that night. Cheap young ones going on a camp that will be a raging party. I wait for the sun to go down, confirming they're not out for a day hike. I call my manager to report. He instructs me to call the new number. I report up to them now. A curt voice answers the phone. He asks my park, then pauses. He asks the issue. Bunch of kids on an unauthorized site. Do I go break it up? I can see their campfire out on the ridge right now. I say, no, do not leave the building. Do not attempt communication. That is all. Report if there are any developments. Right after daybreak, the manager writes up. It's real early. Have you seen them? Did they leave? He asks. No, the car's still there. Let them rest. They're probably all hungover, I reply. He curses non-stop. He then goes inside to make a call. I'm outside looking up the ridge when he exits the station. One AR in his hand, another one strapped across his back, Glock on his hip. He marches single-handedly towards his car. I try to ask him what in God's name he's doing, but he isn't listening or responding. He takes a jerry can of gasoline from his car and marches up the ridge. I yell after him, to no reply. I consider following him, but that doesn't seem like a good idea. I go back inside and call the number. The same curt voice, the same direct questions. Yeah, the manager went up to that campsite, armed to the teeth and carrying gasoline. What the fuck do I do? Stay there. Do not interfere. Backup is inbound. Report if there are any developments. About the same time, I start to see smoke wafting off the ridge. 2 vans ride into the lot at screaming speed. A dozen men, heavily armed and armored, exit quickly. I go out to check. Who are you guys? What's going on? I ask. The men are all lined up with that impeccable military precision. One of them, a commander I assume, exits the vehicle last. He says, "Which direction did he go?" I mean, he's up there. I point at the increasing smoke. The men fan out and start jogging up the ridge. I hear rifles cocking as they leave. I try to shout after them, but no response. I look at the vans they came in. Large, nondescript. They just say DOI response team on the side. Half an hour later, they return, dragging the manager with them. He's bound in zip ties. He screams, "I did what needed to be done. Trust me. It's worse than they thought. We can't stop this. Burn it all." They throw him in the back and sedate him. The commander approaches me. My neck hairs bristle in cold fear. I need to see the office. All computers and anything with a hard drive is coming with me. He mentioned videotapes. I need those too. I unlock the doors and they ransack the place. Everything gets taken. Printed reports from the last few years disappear into those vans. The videotapes get bagged up and held by the commander himself. He studies the gun cage. "Cute. You're out of your league," he scoffs. Finally, they found everything they looked for. The commander tells me, "Call the number. Tell them it's contained. You need a new supervisor. Also, don't talk about this to anyone." They leave, and just on cue, the fire brigade and a few news vans show up. The fire is contained, and the news reports say, rumors of missing campers are unsubstantiated at this time. Still, the rumors alone are enough to scare off this season's campers. The quick change-up of managers is chalked up to bureaucracy. The press dies down after a week or two. The new manager is very good at dealing with them. Thankfully, with no new campers and our now even shorter open hours, we can get more work done around here. Rebuilding the station took some time, and we just set up the new campsites. They're practically spitting distance from the station. Nothing dramatic happens for a few days. Then, on a whim, the manager tells us to set up some cameras around the station and the campsites. There's usually so much human activity around here, all you see are some raccoons. Maybe the rare hungry bear, but we humor him and set them all around. A couple days pass. We collect the footage. I play poker with one of the rookies while the manager watches hours of footage of an empty but brilliantly illuminated parking lot. Then he gets to the footage around the station. Screams come from the office. We barge in, and he's stabbing on the camera hard drives, gibbering things I can't understand, along the lines of, "Told me it was clean, safe, no recent activity." Bullshit here. I'm not gonna do it. He barks at us to leave. Later, he makes a call. The rookie goes up to the door and listens in. The rookie comes back reporting, yeah, he's demanding a transfer. Says they lied to him. Something about they didn't do their jobs properly. He's not prepared or equipped here. Then I just heard the phone click and some sobbing. Hours later, my manager exits the office. His shoulders are slumped, defeated. We cut our hours even further, practically open on weekends only. We'll have a full staff ready those days, but a skeleton crew the rest of the time. Campers are required to check in to one of the closest sites. No campsite, and they're told to leave. We're not authorized to leave the station after dark under any circumstances. In an emergency, do not call 911. Call the number and do exactly what they say. We draw straws for who gets overnight shifts. Why we need to stay overnight if we can't do anything is beyond me. I asked the manager about it, and he just said that standard protocol is to have someone on hand to report any irregularities overnight. I have to work my overnight shift. I keep my phone close, the number dialed in, ready if I need to call. It's a bad night. I just wind up pacing around with my shotgun, glancing into the bright floodlights, trying to see what's past them. I hear crickets, and it relaxes me. Prey is quiet when predators are around. It's a long night. The next night, my manager draws the short straw. He seems resigned. In the end, we all have to take a turn. He brings the brightest damn tactical flashlight I've ever seen. He says he brought it just because he's afraid of the dark. He isn't really. He's afraid of the things in the dark. I get a phone call at 3 a.m. It's him. Get over here now and bring guns, he demands. What? You have a damn arsenal, I responded. Now. I swear to God, I fucked up. Oh man, I think they're attracted to the light. I called that number, and all they said was backup would be here in the morning. Oh fuck, my manager says. I hear the piercing staccato of gunshots. A pause. More gunshots. Screaming. Scuffling. The line goes dead. I call the number. A new terse voice answers. Look, I work at Jefferson Park. I just got off the phone with Bennett. I say, I just spoke with Bennett. What can you report? The voice replies. Something bad. It's serious. I heard gunshots, I told him. We will have backup there as soon as possible. Did he say anything else? He asked me. Yeah, he said he thought they were attracted to the light. It doesn't make sense to me, I told him. Interesting. Thank you for your report. The park is now closed. You will be reassigned. Goodbye. Click. Officially, the park was closed to be scheduled for a controlled burn. Let the old trees die and make room for new ones. There was nothing in the official report about what happened to the manager on duty. The public understanding was bureaucracies need to be shaken up on occasion. No one asked any more questions. I get transferred to a new park, halfway across the country. A change of scenery and beautiful. They've got some odd rules here too. Don't go far after dark. And don't carry a flashlight. I'm concerned about why. Why can't you use a flashlight at night when you need one? They won't tell me. Be safe, everyone. This all went down during the spring break of my junior year of high school. My school was in a pretty small Iowa town with a district spanning several smaller hamlets. During the summer of 2014, a few friends of mine put together a film club that would make short films and compete in national film festivals against other schools. We were a pretty small group and found it kind of difficult to get together for any actual filming until spring break of 2015, when we made plans for a little excursion. 4 of us ended up going on the trip, myself and 3 members of the club, Jake, Bill, and Kyle. We ended up choosing to go camping out at Mossy Glen Hollow, a supposedly haunted state park up in northeastern Iowa. Since the 1850s, there have been several murders and suicides out at Mossy Glen, including a few decapitations and a hired hitman in the 1930s. Being the edgy teens that we were, we jumped at the chance to go hiking and camping somewhere like that. It was within 15 minutes of a small town as well, so stocking up on food wouldn't be that big of an issue either. So, all lights green, we loaded up 2 of our sedans, programmed the GPS, and off we were for a spring break, camping in some haunted woods. After the first hour and a half on the road, a few red flags began to fly. After the last large town before getting way out in the boondocks, my phone's data signal cut out, and the GPS randomly changed directions on us. Since none of us had any idea where the hell we were, or where Mossy Glen was supposed to be, we didn't have much choice but to blindly follow the new route. To save on continuity, I'm going to throw this section in the end. It's not really important to the story, but it can give a bit of perspective on how places like Mossy Glen Hollow end up in the legal state that this place was in. Once we were firmly in the middle of nowhere, our GPS took us off the paved highways and onto gravel roads. At this point, you typically would see the usual brown Iowa DNR signs designating that you were near a state park, but there were none. There weren't even any tree clumps to indicate that you were near some sort of forest. Red flag number 2. About another 10 minutes or so into the drive, and the gravel road soon turns to a dirt road, then a low-maintenance road, then a Class B minimum maintenance road. With Iowa's dedication to road preservation, this basically means that somebody probably came by and took a peek in the 90s and then promptly forgot about its existence. As we come around the last hilly bend that the GPS shows on our route, we see a farmhouse with a large machine shed with no lights or activity around either, and no cars in the driveway. A bit weirded out that a house would be right next to a state park, we slow down and keep rolling. To our dismay, however, the road dissolves into a mess of washed tractor tire gouges from last fall's harvest. We stop the cars as far down as we can pass without getting hung up on a frozen rut and unpack some of our equipment. The road gradually narrows, snakes down the middle of a field, and turns down into the small but very thick clump of woods at the bottom of a wide ravine. We get out and hike down the gradually steepening slope and take in the scenery. At first, everything looks like a pretty damn cool set to film at. There are several limestone outcrops hanging off the hillside, a footpath with some picturesque tree overhang, and even a few birds out that made an unseasonal return from wintering down south. We can all hear some water running, but can't identify a source from the trail. Looking off in any direction, all we could see was a seemingly endless sea of trees. At the bottom of the hill was a small pond, in the middle of a grassy clearing with a fence. As we approached the fence, we notice a sign, "Private property, keep out." Bill checks his watch and realizes that it's almost time for dinner, so we trek back to our vehicles and hook up the GPS. The nearest town over was a little place called Edgewood that had several diners and a gas station to load up on supplies for the week. We brought some canned food, but not much beyond that. As we got to town, we realized that Edgewood was a lot smaller than we had expected, less than 900 people it would turn out. Everyone knows everyone in these small towns, so we got several weird looks when 4 strangers rolled up with plates from the other side of the state. Kyle thought to ask the cashier and a few people at the gas station about Mossy Glen Hollow, and why the only route in was through some guy's field on a busted-out dirt road. To our surprise, nobody had even heard of a place called Mossy Glen, nor could they figure out why the hell 4 high schoolers suddenly rolled into town looking for the place. Red flag number 3. We shrug it off as just a few crazy locals and take off back down the dirt trail. As we round the corner back near the farmhouse, we notice that all the lights are still off and nobody seems to be home. I suggest that we leave some sort of note on the house door that we're going to be parking on the side of the road near their place, just to be safe. It is starting to get late in the day, and being this far out in the country, it wouldn't be unheard of to come face to face with a shotgun when the homeowners find our cars. Since the road is impassable from that point on anyway, parking there wouldn't realistically block anybody off of the road and would still technically be on public land. We hike back down the wooded trail and start scouting for a place to set up camp for the night. Making sure to be on the public side of the fence pond area, we discover that the sea of trees that we saw earlier was actually quite a bit thinner when seen from below. In fact, the dirt path led to a decently sized clearing with a creek and small waterfall cutting through the limestone deposits. None of us could believe that we had missed such a thing a few hours earlier. When Bill comes to a realization, he disappears around the corner back into the trees and emerges at the top of the trail a few minutes later. Though we could plainly see him, the trees lined up just right so that he could not see anything beyond the rocks below the path ledge. Continuing further up the creek, we notice there are conveniently placed rocks about the perfect distance apart to step without disturbing the water or surrounding rocks. One could walk almost silently up and down the creek while the sound of the water masked the steps. Not thinking much of it, we take some pictures of the large moss-covered boulders all around and get some pretty nice scenic shots. We find a place to make camp and everything is going great until we approach the waterfall. Just before the waterfall sat a clearing without any large boulders or rocks and an odd arrangement of logs. One sat horizontal, supported at each end by two piles of rocks. In front sat a crude stone circle with a pile of burnt logs inside, a fire pit with a bench. Though a bit surprised at first, we shrug it off as some weekend project that the people up at the house put together. After all, with such a cool place just a short walk from home, why not? I have a similar fire pit set up at home, so I'm not too concerned. "Hey, what the hell is this?" Kyle yells from a boulder a few yards ahead. On it sat a blaze orange hoodie, a single gardening glove, an empty can of beer, and a stick of deodorant that had seen some serious wear. Looking closer at the beer can, we realize that it must have been opened fairly recently. Foam is still fresh in the bottom of the can, and it still had a funny smell. Bewildered by what the hell we just found, Jake starts looking around the other side of the boulders upstream of the items. "Holy shit, there's a cave over here," he shouts back to us. Later, he told us that the cave was large enough to comfortably fit a person inside, and that, more disturbingly, he saw some red fabric inside as well. Before he can get a good look around, Kyle calls the three of us back over to him with a sense of urgency. He speaks very quietly to us and indicates that we shouldn't shout back. "Shampoo, fucking shampoo," he whispers, pointing urgently down at his feet. Sure enough, in the mud and leaves, there's a bottle of Suave shampoo right next to the creek. At this point, we're all adequately freaked the fuck out and ready to call our little soiree quits. Bill remains pretty sure that this is just junk left behind by the people up at the house after a weekend of few too many bush lights. But things just didn't add up to me. There's one detail that I've been leaving out up to this point. The day before, this part of Iowa got some heavy rain, which contributed to the mud situation on the road and on the trail. With the combination of wind and rain, the items on the rocks would have shown some signs of being wet, if not been displaced entirely. Also, the air was pretty cold, as it is every year around this time, not getting above the mid-40s for the whole week. Then everything starts to click for me. Whoever drank the beer and left the shampoo, hat, glove, and deodorant there must have done so sometime this morning. The fire pit also had some fresh char marks on the rocks, and the wood had not been wet for a while, meaning that it must have been lit last night at the earliest. The small cave would have provided enough shelter from the rain to stay dry. With the freezing temperatures all throughout the day, whoever was using the shampoo out here must have had little other choice to do so. If it was the homeowners, they would have had to be serious masochists to bathe in the shallow, freezing, rocky creek rather than at home. If it wasn't them, then we likely weren't alone right now. Whoever left these things out left in a hurry. And if they were here 4 hours ago, they would have been able to see us on the trail cliff long before we even knew they were down here. Remembering the arrangements of rocks on the stream, they could have even been leaving their camp just as we were coming down the dirt trail. As I processed this, I started to look around at my surroundings and realized that the small area was bordered by the thick trees on the trail side, several sets of huge boulders on the pond side, and limestone cliffs everywhere else. Due to the tree, rock, and hill cover, you could light a fire in the pit at night, and nobody around would ever know. The illusion of being able to see up the dirt trail from the camp, but not down, played in reverse from the cliffs. If you were wearing brown or green, you could easily see down from the rocks on top to the camp below while blending in with the trees above. Coming to these realizations, I noticed something else, something more sinister. The birds and small animals that we previously heard are now quiet. Aside from the soft babble of the creek, the entire place is completely silent. As I start to explain this to the rest of the group, I see the wheels turning in their heads as well. Jake starts to head back to the small cave when a rustling up on the limestone ridge line catches our attention. Something large was shifting around up there, something that apparently didn't want Jake to see what was in that cave. We all look up, and whatever or whoever made that noise starts shuffling down the ridge toward the makeshift camp. Because of the high cliff, the only way back down to us would be by going all the way back down to the pond and then double back up the stream. Realizing this, and almost shitting ourselves at how open we were, we book it back up the stream, up the dirt path, across the field, and back to our cars. On the drive back to Edgewood, we all try and process what the fuck just happened back there. I take a look at a satellite map, and the only really accessible way to the cliff where we heard the noise would be to walk up there from the pond. It was too craggy to approach from the adjacent field to the east. Whatever made that noise would had to have been large too, and a deer getting up there wouldn't necessarily be out of the question. It would have had some incredible timing to have started moving around just as Jake started looking at the cave and whatever red fabric was inside. Kyle found a report of an escaped convict from a local prison a few weeks ago and was convinced that it was his camp that we found, though we were all doubtful at best of this idea. To satisfy his concerns, we agreed to report the strange things we found to the police anonymously, since we all wanted to really get home at this point. None of us followed up on them though, and I doubt anything came out of it. A small, close-knit town police department gets a report of strange sightings from some stranger the same day that 4 high schoolers roll up and park outside a farmer's house for a few hours, and then book it out. Doesn't exactly spell high-threat criminal activity to me. Still, things just don't seem to add up. Whoever came running down that cliff, if it indeed was a who, wanted to keep whatever was inside that cave hidden, but not enough to actually fight 4 decently tall and able teenagers. We figured he just wanted to scare us off, since the noises seemed to stop once we reached the dirt path. I thought it odd that someone living out in the woods with something seemingly to hide would set up shop in a state park. That is, until I checked my GPS again. That little reroute that it took us on was an old entrance to the park that had been cut off by the purchase of the lake area, sometime between the map records used for Google's navigation being updated and that day. The current entrance to the park is about 2 miles north of where the GPS sent us, thinking it found a faster route. The place we were at was still public land for sure, but not quite what we pictured. So, Guy in Mossy Glen Hollow, let's not meet. I have a story. It isn't mine, but it happened to my uncle. He used to tell me this story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah, and my uncle, Mark, went on a mission at 19. They sent him to a reservation in Arizona. They paired him up with a companion named Carl. When they first got there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on the reservation grounds. Eventually, they came to a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. This reservation wasn't very big, and it was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night, they were trying to sleep, when all of a sudden, their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climbed under their table for cover. Mark could distinctively hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, kind of like a group of people. After about 5 minutes, it stopped. The next day, they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The family got very quiet and then told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next night, it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again, they climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that, due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them off the reservation. They then go into a convenience store, and they were talking together about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." Confused, they ask him, "Can't talk about what?" The guy continues to tell them about the skinwalkers. He says they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, the skinwalkers will come for their souls. They just walked out of there baffled. They thought it was another scare tactic. So that night, when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, threw it open, and yelled, "Hey!" When he did that, he saw these 3 animals run off. 2 were a wolf and 1 was a bear, but they looked strange, almost with human features. As he watched them run towards the trees, all 3 stood up on 2 legs and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so bad that they called their mission president the next morning, and they asked to be moved. They were relocated that day. For a year, nothing happened. One day, they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city, and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 p.m. and met Jimmy, and they go to leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We are driving through a dangerous area at night, so we can't make any stops. If you need to use the restroom, you need to go now." Jimmy says, "I'm fine." The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark. "I'm not kidding. Go do your business." Jimmy was insistent he was fine, so they hit the road. As they were about 30 minutes into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries. Jimmy starts complaining that he needed to pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here. You'll have to hold it." Jimmy keeps going on. "I really can't hold it." So the mission president stops the car and says, "Okay, but you will do your business next to the door. And if I say get into the car, you better get into the car fast." With a look of confusion, Jimmy says, "All right." He opens the door and starts to do his business. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out. What's going on? The mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. All of a sudden, Mark sees something next to the car on his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer. They were going over 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for 10 minutes until it finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. There was not a word spoken through the whole ordeal. And Jimmy says, "What did I just see?" The mission president says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." January 26th, 2025. The story I'm sitting down to tell is a true one experienced by a faithful friend of mine, Sam and I. I'm often reluctant to tell this story at length to most people, as the subject matter is unexplainable and rather strange. I don't want to be viewed as the superstitious nut, but having guided all across the country and having extensive experience in many environments around the United States, I feel I have the authority to tell this story. Essentially what I'm saying is I've been around in the deep dark hollows all across North America and never experienced something so strange as I did that night. I don't fancify my expressions in the woods, nor do I hopefully imagine there's something more to a twig breaking. As anyone who has spent a good deal of time in the woods knows, there's no reason to. Eventually, you'll experience something daring or fantastic. I am a hunter first and foremost, and to a hunter, there's always an explanation, a reason to the wilderness and her inhabitants. It's how we identify patterns and exploit an animal's rhythm to make a successful hunt. As a hunter, you're a sort of woodsman detective, piecing together clues to set yourself up for success. Let's just say this tale is a cold case. Let's get into it. It was early summer, and I was itching to go camping. I'd recently received a new tent and was eager to use it. I called up a good buddy, Sam, and we planned our camping adventure. We considered going up into the Grayson Highlands, or even south into North Carolina. After debating it, we decided it would be more fun to camp somewhere we wouldn't run into any other people. Deep in the woods, far from anyone else, where we could bushcraft, hoot and holler, and bring a gun without fear of scaring the yuppies camping next to us. While we both lived in the woods, I definitely had access to the most remote stretch of woods between us. So we loaded up our stuff and began hiking deep into the valley below my childhood home. The hike was almost completely straight down a steep hillside, deep into a hollow that held a small patch of flat land, a floodplain area, and creek. The small creek that ran gave the area a beautiful ambience. Early signs of summer were visible all around, and the weather was great. We hiked until we felt the need to start gathering firewood before nightfall. Behind us was a steep hillside that rose into the west for miles. In front of us was the creek, and to the left, the start of another ridge and hillside that rose high into the east and north. To our right, the valley we were in continued to go down, cutting a deep valley, and on the other side of the creek, another ridge, separated by a small stream from the ridge to the left, rose into the west and to the south. These two ridges in front of us ran for miles, and the little valley formed by the small creek split these ridges for a long ways up, until it hit the spring head. This is important for later in the story. Off to the right, further down the valley, more splits in the ridges are made by little tributaries. We started building camp by clearing the brush and leaves away and constructing a small fire pit. I placed a tarp on the ground to separate my tent from the damp earth. Remember this, the tarp extended out roughly a foot on each side of my tent. Sam had a hammock that he planned to sleep in. I've only ever camped in a hammock once, and it didn't go great, but I didn't say anything to him, thinking that maybe he would enjoy it. We gathered a hefty load of firewood, consisting of some nearby reasonably dry stuff. It was shaping up to be a really nice camping trip. I've only spoken about the joy of being out there on this blog before, so I won't beat a dead horse, but it was really nice to be away from people. Sam and I sat around the fire and shot the shit until the sun went down. Now, one of the things Sam and I have always bonded on has been Bigfoot shows. We're both skeptics, and I would say we hold a similar or the same opinion on the subject. Our interest is less about believing in Bigfoot, but rather we just find the subject matter to be nostalgic, silly, and a fun thing to joke about. So, I brought up the idea to Sam that we begin to hunt Bigfoot. He laughed and thought it was a great idea. So we began doing the antics they do in the Finding Bigfoot TV show. We started with the classic tree knocks, Appalachian Sasquatch. Tree knock, for those unaware, is when you use a stick to beat on a tree, making a loud knocking sound that echoes through the forest. Supposedly Sasquatch communicate this way. We didn't think anything of it at all. As I said before, we didn't really believe. We were just joking around. So we begin by knocking on the trees and then stopping and listening for a response. After a few times of doing this, we paused, and hearing nothing, I began to think of a joke to crack and something else to do. Before I could open my mouth, we heard clear as day, a tree knock far off somewhere on the ridge to the left. I looked at Sam and said, "Dude." Sam just looked back at me in surprise. I then did some more knocks, and we listened again. Then, off in the distance, we heard more knocks in response. Then the other ridge to the right, we began hearing knocks. Sam at this point was beginning to get freaked out a bit and was perplexed as to what it could be. I at the time was such a hard skeptic, I carried on and insisted that it was a person or a woodpecker. But who in the world would be out there, deeper in the woods than we are, on private land? What woodpecker makes 3 loud booming knocks on the tree that sound exactly like the knocks we make? Sam voiced his rebuttal. I ignored these arguments and held strong to the fact that there is no Bigfoot. I then insisted that we push the envelope by doing whoops and howls, just like they do on TV. Sam was not very enthused by this idea, being the humbler and smarter one of us that night, knowing sometimes there's certain things you don't mess with. But at the time, I was full of piss and vinegar, and stubborn as a mule about the fact that Bigfoot is not real. I had also brought a gun with me, and was certain I could fight off anything we would need to fight off. So, we started howling into the woods. It was dark that night, being a new moon, and beyond the firelight, you couldn't see a damn thing. We would howl and wait, listening for a reply. After a few howls, the excitement of, "What was that?" started to fade, and my logical, rational, science-based theory of the woodpecker began to appear true. Then, out of the dark distance came one of the strangest sounds I've ever heard. A howl. Not a canine howl, not an owl's hoot, but a fucking ape howl. Sam's eyes were as big as backhoe tires, and even I was finding it hard to reason that one. Despite this, I continued my ignorant stubbornness, and threw out another howl. Off to the left ridge, it replied to us again, the clearest ape whoop I've ever heard, as if it were recorded by researchers in the Congo. I looked at Sam, myself feeling more curious and excited than anything else. I reiterated, "Dude." Then something truly unexplainable and spooky happened. More whoops and howls began on the ridge to the right, and further down the valley. And they weren't random. They had etiquette, as if they were chatting back and forth with each other. The one to the left would howl. The one to the right would whoop and howl. The first would respond, and then the one way down the valley would chime in. Sam was really freaked out now, and began considering if we should leave. I, being a stubborn idiot, claimed it was owls. Owls? We were both raised in these hollers. I've heard owls. You're gonna tell me that was an owl? Have you ever in your life heard an owl that sounded like a fucking ape? Sam argued against my claim. Well, no, but there's no way Bigfoot is real. It has to be a bunch of owls speaking to each other. There's nothing else it could be, I replied, half laughing in astonishment and disbelief of what was unfolding that night. Sam and I kind of bickered for a minute over it, and then decided the wisest decision was to stop antagonizing whatever it was in the woods, miles around us, whooping and knocking. It wasn't too long after that we decided to go to bed. I crawled into my tent and Sam into his hammock. We left the fire going, and every time the fire died down, the woods came to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was stirring. All around the camp, we could hear what sounded like things being thrown and footsteps. From time to time, we would hear another knock or another howl coming from a new position. Sam would leap out of his hammock and chuck loads of wood onto the fire and make it as big as possible. He would then lay back down to sleep. This repeated about 3 more times. Each time the fire died, things got spookier and spookier. A few times Sam would say, "Did you hear that?" And every time I would just blame it on possums nearing camp, hoping to find food scraps. Well, about the 3rd time, Sam ran out of firewood, meaning that this time when the fire died, it died for good, leaving us to the dark void of the Appalachian holler. I vividly remember I'd fallen asleep before the fire died, and after it died, there was so much stirring around camp, I began to wake up. I was slowly waking up, thinking I was having some sort of nightmare, when I finally fully sobered and realized that my dream was pleasant. It was reality that was full of frightening sounds and things that go bump in the night. The woods around us had become loud with unexplainable movement. The movement of multiple large things. The whooping and knocking had stopped, which did not comfort me. With all the new sounds right outside my door, there was maybe a 30-yard perimeter around camp that the sounds did not cross. Then, suddenly, an extremely loud crashing began through the twigs, leaves, and branches. It was something large running full sprint through the woods, starting maybe 50 yards away and running straight towards our camp. It grew louder and louder until the sound of crushing leaves turned to crinkling tarp. The creature was standing on the tarp my tent was situated on. I was frozen, like a child frozen in fear, eyes wide open. My heart was pounding out of my chest so hard, I thought it would explode. I then heard high above my tent, not near the ground, not 4 feet up, but high above my tent, the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of a huff and blow, exactly the way you hear a gorilla do it on TV, or how the apes in Planet of the Apes do it. 3 forceful huff and blows. Then the creature turned around and ran back the way it came, back into the darkness of the night. Sam practically leaped out of his hammock and said, "You had to have heard that." I replied with, "Yeah, let's get the fuck out of here." I slid around into the chamber of my 30-30 and crawled out of the tent. We both got busy grabbing only our essentials and started out of the woods. Using shitty dim flashlights, we made our way up the hill, frantically looking behind us into the terrible night and trying to move fast without running. We hiked a long ways, and by the time we made it back to the house, it was far past midnight. We never did see what it was that charged us, and we never did hear anything else after that, but whatever it was, scared us enough to make us hike out in the dead of night and leave all of our gear there. We returned the next morning in full daylight to gather our things. Looking back, I wish we had surveyed the area for tracks or some clues as to what it was, but at the time, we did not want to be down there for any longer than we had to. Having been some years since this incident happened, I would go down there in a heartbeat and not think a thing of it. When I come home, I usually feel a sense of ease in the woods. It feels like a weight is lifted off of your shoulders, knowing there are no cougars or grizzly bears to worry about. For my Western outdoorsy folk, familiar with cougar country, reading this and thinking, I don't feel a weight in the woods, my reply would be the question, have you noticed you've been stalked before? Cougars are some of the sneakiest creatures in the animal kingdom, and just because you've never noticed it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I myself have been stalked. I've written about it here previously. It's a feeling that sticks with you and definitely put you on edge in cougar country for a long time after. I have a colleague who guides Western big game in New Mexico who told me a story once that during a hunt, he had a fellow guide spotting for him, and that guide watched a cougar stalk my friend through a grove of trees before giving up. My friend never had the slightest idea he was being stalked. I believe for an avid outdoorsman in cougar country, it is inevitable. And as far as grizzly country, it's a similar feeling, but a bit different. Most ill bear encounters happen because you surprise the bear in thick woods. I have many friends from my time in Alaska who would share stories of being charged by monster grizzlies from out of nowhere. They're just hiking along, and then boom, 800 pounds of death is blasting straight towards them. And the consensus is the same amongst them. If you spend enough time out there, it will happen eventually. I luckily was never charged during my time in Alaska. I avoided known bear hangouts, but the few times I spent in bear country, I always had this jack-in-the-box anxiety, just waiting for it to happen. What is funny though, is despite that weight being lifted initially, an old feeling always returns. I know it's not some sort of psychological thing having to do with that patch of woods specifically, because I feel it in most places in Appalachia. It's a feeling of being watched, a feeling that something is there, and a feeling of dread. And it amplifies every time you hear some strange crashing in the woods, or a sound you cannot explain. Most of the time I've experienced this, I've had a gun, and I think to myself, come on man, you're the most badass thing out here. Yet, I can never shake that anxiety. My brother, without having ever heard this story, recently asked me over the phone one day, don't think I'm crazy, but have you ever felt creeped out in the woods below the house? I don't know what it is, but every time I go down there, I feel like I'm being watched, and I get filled with dread. Hearing him say that sent shivers down my back. Simply because I always dismissed this feeling, I've swept this story under the rug for years, telling myself it was just a bear or whatever else. To hear my brother, who is a Marine, tell me that, certified to me that I was not simply being a scaredy cat. I've only felt this in two regions of the country, Appalachia and the redwood forests of Northern California. Now some of you may be listening to this, thinking I'm a nutjob Bigfoot believer. I've been reluctant to share this story for that reason, but I want to end this saying I have no idea what it was that made those calls that night. I also have no idea what it was that busted into our camp. We never did lay our eyes on anything, but I want to reiterate that the story is true, verbatim to how it happened as I can recall it, without any embellishment. I have no idea what it was, and you can make your own decision as to what you think it was. But being an experienced woodsman, never have I ever experienced something like that since, and I have no worldly explanation for it. Those were the events that transpired that night, and I'll let you make of that what you will. So let me start out by saying that I enjoy writing, though this is nonfiction, but it hopefully will be an interesting read. I also admit that I have absolutely no memory of this experience. I was a little over 2 years old and just starting to walk on my own when this event took place. My mom only told me this story around 3 years ago when I was 32 and about to get married. My mother was raised in a very tiny fundamentalist Christian community and had no belief in the paranormal. She believed that our souls sleep until Judgment Day or something like this. Ergo, there are no ghosts or spirits to haunt houses. Even over 30 years later, she still sounded terrified as she told me this. This woman, who always talks way too loud, was literally whispering by the end of it, and she was white as a sheet. I believed her completely, and still do. I'm just glad I can't remember it too. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother, Victor. We were very crowded in our rented flat with 2 babies. My parents decided to move to a rambling old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks and took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said that the first time I saw the house, I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like that mean house, ugly house, don't like. Scary house, mama, don't like." My mom says this behavior was very out of character for me, but I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks, so she chalked it up to the stress of the move. Now, this house was ramshackle as fuck, and in the middle of nowhere. The kitchen was to the far rear of the house, and until recently, before we moved in, still had a working, ancient wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught the back wall on fire a couple of months before we moved in, and caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed, so my young, broke parents got a cheap rent agreement. Gotta love the 80s. On the second floor, directly above the kitchen, was a locked room. The landlord claimed it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done the repairs, claimed that the only fire damage left was in the kitchen, since it had been the worst and was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant that the room was off limits, and my parents always respected that. I would have looked 100%. I know all this because I heard stories about the shitty farmhouse with the creepy door my whole life, and there were pictures of us in and around the farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both of my parents have told me it gave them the creeps. A few months after we moved in, my mother and I were in the yard with our pit Doberman mix, Boss. She was hanging laundry, and I was rolling around with the dog. She said that just as she noticed that everything was way too silent, Boss started going apeshit from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards to the house on the left, there was a small duck pond. Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, then turning and running back towards the pond, barking frantically the whole time. My mom saw something thrashing around in the middle of the pond. She took off towards the water full speed. Boss beat her there and drug me out of the water himself. Although my mom was confused how I got so far so fast and how I got into the center of the pond since it was over my head and I couldn't swim, she figured she underestimated me and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from now on. A few weeks later, she was cooking downstairs. Boss was outside, Victor asleep in his crib, and I was in my playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mom said she could listen for us crying or fussing while cooking. My mom said that no longer than 15 minutes after the last time she looked in on us kids, Boss starts going crazy again in the yard. She runs up to check on us. Victor is sleeping. Every baby gate is still shut and locked, but I am not in my room. A frenzied search reveals I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning causes my mom to rush outside to see what the hell he's trying to tell her this time. She said he was running circles in the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she got outside, he took off towards the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around, and bark at my mother, wait for her to catch up a bit before racing off again. He ended up leading her almost 1.5 miles out onto the dirt road that separated our property from our neighbors. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbor's side of the rocky drive. She said what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She plowed into the trees with her heart in her throat and her stomach full of ice. She said she noticed many piles of corrugated tin, tarps, tires, and other debris. The miasma was emanating most strongly from these junkyard cairns. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bones and rotted chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently our neighbor, in an effort to cheat his taxes, had been illegally slaughtering the cattle and hiding the remains in at least one of the few thick stands of trees around. She found me in the dead center of this thicket, just standing there looking around like I was confused, surrounded by carnage. She said I didn't seem scared or anything, just standing. She rushed over to me and, after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, began questioning me on why I was here, how I got there, and other questions like that. Keep in mind that although my mother said I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary. She said I told her, with that serious look only a small child can give, that the children brought me here, shitting her pants at the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs, and walk right past her on the way down the stairs and out with me. She demanded to know what children and where the hell they are now. I looked at her dead serious and told her the ones that live with us in the room at the top of the stairs, and that I didn't see them anymore. After a moment of stunned silence, she started asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said as long as she questioned me about what happened, I would just stand there staring at her with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said this same pattern held true every other time she brought it up to me, so she was always left wondering and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. While the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. My mother is adamant that me being in the hidden slaughter yard that day was flat impossible. She says there's no way I could have even known it was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs, past her, and end up almost 2 miles down the road. And in this place, in under 15 minutes, I was only 2 and as slow and clumsy as most toddlers. As I said, she's still shaken by it after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I've thought about hypnosis, but haven't yet decided I really want to remember. Maybe it's better to let it be a mystery, because whatever the fuck those things were, I really don't think they were children. I'm pretty sure we were involved in some weird couple's killing spree last night. My boyfriend and I's family are big campers. We try to go as often as possible and try finding different places depending on the weather and season. We booked a beautiful spot on the lake and had been anticipating this trip for months. Imagine our shock when we get to our site, when we discover that the lake is flooded most of the campsite, with the exception of ours, the one next to it, and then one about 100 feet away. We didn't get to enjoy the lake because there was no beach access and the water wasn't safe. We shrugged it off and set up our camp as usual. At about 7 p.m., we see a car pull into the campsite right next to ours. No big deal, we just go about our night. I noticed that they were not in a hurry to set up camp. A middle-aged man and woman got out of the car. I'm a very observant and paranoid person, so I notice details that most people may not think anything of. In my mind, these campers arrive really late after check-in, and they don't unload anything from the car. They didn't talk to each other, and they just kind of looked into our site in passing. Okay, no big deal, I think. A bad storm hit us a few hours later, and we were literally holding down our tents while the couple next to us just sat in their car. No tent whatsoever. I still thought this was odd, but my boyfriend said they probably were car campers and had the back set up to sleep in. Okay, makes sense, I guess, but still, why come to a tent campground? We go to sleep and all is well. That is, until I'm awakened by the sound of footprints in our vicinity. We had been drinking, so the fact that this noise woke me up means it was very close to our tent. I spring up and listen. I heard people walking up to our tent, and I saw the silhouette of a man through my tent. In a state of panic, I unzip the tent and look outside. 2 people with red headband flashlights are standing about 7 feet from me. I rush myself back into the tent and grab my pepper spray air pistol. During all of this, my boyfriend wakes up asking me why I opened the tent, and I explain what I had just seen. His reasoning is that it was the neighbors just gathering firewood, and I can't shoot them for that. Immediately, the people walk away, and we don't hear anything else. I take a moment to think that maybe I'm being paranoid, and I'm also a little hungover. I try going back to bed, but I can barely sleep. The next morning, we wake up, and the couple next to us has what looked like a tarp tied from one tree to another. I'm thinking, what the fuck is that? I notice that the man has the same khaki long pants he had on the night prior, and the woman is also wearing the same clothes. This in itself isn't weird while camping, but what was weird is that they were not dressed for camping. It's hot, and the clothes they were wearing were not what you would wear in this environment. Long pants, almost like to protect you when you go through the woods to hijack another site, is what I thought. We go about the day, and I keep noticing that the couple doesn't seem to interact with each other at all. They don't talk, and they start a fire in the fire pit for making lunch, taking it very easy. My boyfriend and I's family decide that due to the weather and the lake, we would head home early. Well, the couple next to us, who had literally just started a fire, immediately packed up and left just as we started to pack. They left in a hurry. We finish packing and get to my boyfriend's parents' house, and we decide to stay for a while. Well, I told my boyfriend's parents about the whole thing and how often weird it was, and what they told me chilled me to the core. They said that the man upon arrival seemed to be antagonizing the dogs to see how they would react. They weren't sure why he took this stance, but after me telling them this, we put our stories together. They pointed out how the man would stand and stare at the dogs, while the woman was acting busy doing absolutely nothing but just moving around. They then pointed out that the campers sat facing our campsite and not the lake. They also noticed that there was minimal interaction between them, and they just seemed to stare at us. My boyfriend's parents said that one of the dogs would occasionally growl throughout the night, and they didn't get much rest. When I brought that up to my boyfriend, he said they were probably just getting firewood. My boyfriend's parents both said, why would they go out of their way to collect firewood that has been heavily rained on? And why wait until we go to sleep and then pack up the next day and leave? So, this is what I think. I think these people were locals who knew the condition of the campsite and scoped it out. They noticed our site was reversed and isolated. No one else was there but us and them, and some other campers pretty far apart. I think they camped out to either rob us or murder us. But then they heard my boyfriend say something about not shooting them, and they didn't know it was in reference to the pepper spray airgun, and they decided to back off. They then spent the afternoon observing us until they saw us leaving and decided to call it off. None of their behavior makes any sense. Am I crazy? I'm posting this as a warning. There are things out there that you don't want to know about. Stay away from them. Don't go looking for them. I'll tell you my story in hopes that it will quench your curiosity. It was a night like any other night, at least lately. I had barely arrived at the ranger station, and there were already 4 calls of vacationers' homes getting broken into. Out here in the West Virginia Wildlife Preserve, people tend to think that just because they plant some houses, that the animals should somehow know and respect boundaries. That's kind of tough when the animals are on a huge plot of land where they've never been hunted and never even been threatened by anything other than a bigger animal. Folks seem to think this is a great vacation spot for them. What they don't realize is it's also a great vacation spot for the animals. I hopped in the company truck and started toward my first destination of the night. An elderly couple had been terrorized by a deer that literally broke in through a sliding glass door. They managed to trap it in a side room and needed someone to go release it. I got elected. When I got there, the vacationers looked like the ones caught in headlights. They were still wide-eyed. I could tell they were in shock. I had them go into another room and close the door. Once they were out of the way, I found the closest door to the outside and opened it. I then went to the room with the deer in it. I slowly opened the door and was shocked to find the room covered in blood. The deer was laying on the floor, panting. I approached it, slowly circling around to leave the doorway open, hoping to give it an escape route. The closer I got, the more I realized this deer wasn't going anywhere. Its side was covered with claw marks. At first, I thought a coyote had attacked it, but the marks were too far apart. They were large enough to be caused by a bear, but the individual claws were too far apart. I'd never seen anything like this. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say Freddy Krueger sliced it up. The deer's eyes went wide when I approached it, but it didn't jump up and run. I took this as a bad sign. Its breath came in ragged gasps as I struggled to roll it over. Once I did, it was my turn to struggle breathing. Its entire side was torn to shreds, but that wasn't the worst part. There were large chunks that were missing. I examined the wounds and found bite marks where the missing flesh should have been, but the bites were massive. If it wouldn't have challenged the laws of nature as well as my own sanity, I would have said it was bitten by a shark. Blood poured out of the side, and the deer struggled to draw breath. I stood and left the room, leaving the poor creature the dignity of a private death. When I went back in, it was still. I took pictures with my cell phone and tried my best to carry the creature out without making more of a mess. After I got it loaded on the back of my truck, I went back inside and talked to the vacationers. When I opened the door to the room they were in, the woman's eyes grew wide and she started screaming. The man's eyes were the size of saucers as well. I approached them slowly with my arms outstretched to try to calm them down. It seemed to have the opposite effect. They started climbing the furniture and clawing at the walls to get away from me. I decided to back away and give them some room. "What's wrong?" I asked. The man pointed a shaky finger at me. You're covered in blood," he replied. "The deer got you," the woman said. "You've got rabies." "Or worse," the man said, keeping his distance. "I'm sorry, folks," I said. "This is the deer's blood." "You killed it just for breaking in?" the woman asked. "What? No. It was already injured. I just took it to my truck," I told her. The couple seemed to settle down and consider this. "So you don't have rabies," the man said, slowly looking me up and down. "Or anything else," the woman said, hiding behind her husband. "No, ma'am, I'm fine." She took her turn eyeing me up and down, I assumed looking for wounds. Being satisfied, they asked the one question I didn't want to answer. "So what killed the deer?" the man asked. "I really don't know," I said truthfully. Having just gotten them calmed down, I didn't want to send them back into a panic. "It was probably just a coyote," I said. "A coyote?" the man said, diving back into the pool of panic. "Or a bear," I continued, and failing to calm them. "A bear?" the woman cried, diving in after her husband. "You know, folks, you've had a traumatic night," I said. "I can't tell you what to do, but if I were you, We're leaving," the woman said, dragging her husband out of the room. "That sounds like a good idea," I said. And then, like an idiot, I added, "I hope you enjoyed your stay." They either didn't hear me or ignored me. Either way, it wasn't long until I heard a car start, then roar away from the house. I went back into the room where the deer had been trapped and started working backwards from there, trying to find out what had happened. It wasn't hard to pick up the trail. It had been bleeding badly. Seeing the bites and claw marks made that fairly obvious. I tracked back through the kitchen and out the smashed glass door. Once outside, I turned on my flashlight. The trail was a little harder to follow, but not much. I could still see drops of blood besides its tracks as I followed them back toward the pond behind the house. I approached the pond and saw signs of a struggle. This must have been where the deer was attacked. There were other tracks in with the deers, but they didn't make sense to me. They were large, too large. Their shape was odd as well. If I had to call them anything, I would have called them duck prints, but massive, larger than any ducks by many times. A giant duck with shark teeth. I think I'll leave that out of my report. I thought. It suddenly struck me what the tracks were. It was a man with swim fins on his feet. But why go to all that trouble to poach a deer when you can just knock it out with a tranquilizer gun? My mind sent me an answer, but I didn't like it. What if that man is a psychopath, just getting his kicks by killing an animal with his bare hands? I thought about the mental hospital in the neighboring county and wondered if one of their patients had taken an unsanctioned leave of absence and they were trying to keep it quiet. I didn't like that thought one bit. Aside from the fact that it didn't explain the huge bites on the deer, it also meant we had someone who might suddenly get a taste for killing. Doing this to animals was horrible, but what if he decided to go after something bigger? I shot a look at the house, wondering how many vacationers were within a short walk from this spot and how many were armed. As I contemplated the safety of the people in the area, I heard something behind me. I whipped around and shone my flashlight, but I saw nothing. I scanned the pond and saw a ripple emanating from the middle, probably just a fish jumping. I took some more pictures of the struggle area with my phone, then started back toward my truck. I had more calls to answer, and this riddle would have to wait. I drove halfway around the lake, around 3 miles, to the other vacation home where a break-in had been reported. When the woman in her 30s answered the door, she took a step back. "Oh my," she said, looking at the dried blood all over my uniform. "Good evening, ma'am. Sorry about my appearance," I said. "Did you report a break-in?" "Yes, we did. Please come in," she said in a friendly tone, yet gave me a wide berth while closing the door. She led me upstairs to the kitchen. For some reason, I was expecting to find blood all over like with the last house. However, this was a completely different mess. She showed me the door. It had been forced open, but not shattered like the last one. There was only a small amount of glass broken. Then the door latch had been unlocked, and the door slid open. There were faint images of my giant duck tracks like the last house. My spine turned to ice. This house was over 3 miles away from the other. There were many more people in that space that might have fallen victim to this crazed person. The woman showed me the rest of the kitchen and the mess that had been left. There were a few cans of sardines that had been opened and eaten, and also some cans of tuna fish. The strange thing was how they were opened. The cans had been torn into with something sharp, but not a can opener. The marks looked like they were torn open with claws. I shuddered to imagine the amount of strength it took to do something like that. And then I spotted it. Beside one of the cans of tuna was a small puddle of blood. "Ma'am, could I trouble you for a sandwich bag?" I asked. She handed me one, and I carefully tried to scrape as much blood into it as possible. I sealed it and put it in my pocket, then went out through the broken door. Behind the house, just like with most of these vacation houses, there was a small pond. I traced the tracks back to it, and they disappeared at the water line. I shone my light over the water, but the only thing I saw was a stray turtle. I stared at it for a long time, as I thought it would somehow give me a clue as to what was going on. "What should we do?" the woman said, nearly scaring me half to death. I hadn't heard her follow me out the door and into the yard. "I'll send someone around to look at that door in the morning," I said. "In the meantime, it might not be a bad idea to sleep in a room that has a lock on the door. I'm sure they won't be back, but just in case." She didn't seem very confident by that idea, but thanked me as I left. The next 2 reports were just teenagers breaking in and stealing beer. That was it. No bloody wildlife, no weird tracks, just kids being kids. I went back to the station, changed out of my bloody uniform, and spent the rest of my night filling out reports on what had happened. When my shift was over and I passed on what had happened, I took a little trip to the neighboring county. I stopped in at the mental hospital and asked if they had any escapes lately. The nurse looked at me like I'd asked her if she was wearing deodorant. "We don't have escapes," she said, with obvious pride that showed as arrogance. I thanked her and left, feeling less than satisfied with her answer. Next, I stopped in at the local police department and asked one of my friends on the force if they could analyze the blood sample for me. I shared my thoughts that there might be an escapee from the mental hospital, and the blood sample might help us find out who and track him down. It was well past noon until I got to bed. That night when I got to work, it was pandemonium. There had been more break-ins, and people were starting to panic. The owner of the resort was frantic. People were canceling left and right and wanting their money back. When I walked in, he stormed his pudgy face right up to mine. "You told people to go home," he fumed, glaring up at me. I merely suggested, "Do you want to pay for the rental out of your salary?" "I work for the state, not you," I said. He turned a deeper shade of red. "Would you rather see people in body bags instead of animals?" I said. "That wouldn't do much for business now, would it?" He turned fire engine red and stormed out, mumbling, "We'll see." I investigated 5 break-ins that night. Only 2 of them were legit. The rest seemed like half-hearted attempts to stage a break-in so they could get out of paying for their rental. The 2 real ones shared the same characteristics as before. Just enough of a broken window to open the door. The cans of whatever seafood was available. They even got shrimp out of the freezer. Everything about the way the intruder acted pointed to a person. All I needed to know was who. Again, I followed the tracks back to the nearby pond. I stood there for a long time, studying the surface of the water. I knew these ponds were all designed the same. A roughly 40-yard by 40-yard body of water, around 5 foot deep in the middle, stocked with mostly bluegill for catch and release fishing. Anyone using these ponds to hide would have to be holding their breath for inhuman periods of time. I stared at the surface for 20 minutes. If someone was out there, they had an invisible snorkel or an extra set of lungs. After my rounds of investigating and reporting, I decided to stick around and do a little extra investigating. I ran home, grabbed my swim trunks, mask, and snorkel, and I went to the site of the most recent break-in. I waded out into the water, unsure of what I would find, when a snake slithered past me. I let it go and waded deep enough to where I could swim. I hovered at the level of the surface, dipping my mask underwater to get a glimpse of whatever there was to see. There wasn't much. Fish, underwater plants, and obviously lots of water. Just what you would expect from a pond. As I kept going towards the middle, the water was getting deeper. I now couldn't touch the bottom. I had to float on the surface. Looming in front of me was a dark spot at the bottom of the pond. I took it for a rock, but swam close enough to investigate anyway. In for a penny, in for a pound. As I drew close enough to hover over it, I realized it wasn't a rock. I took a deep breath and dove to find out what it was. The further I swam down, the further I was able to swim. I kept going and going. Light disappeared. I was sure I'd been swimming straight down for a solid minute without touching the bottom. I turned and looked up. The surface of the pond was only a pinprick of light. My lungs screamed at me to turn around. I had no choice but to comply. I clawed at the water in desperation. It seemed like I was swimming in mud or something was pulling me down. Almost like a force or current pushing against me, wanting me to drown before I could fully explore this hidden secret. After what felt like an eternity, I broke the surface of the water and gasped for air. I swam over to the shallows and walked out of the pond. I collapsed on the shore and lay there for a long time, trying to regain my breath. As my brain received oxygen, I thought about what had happened and if it had been real, an illusion, or if I'd just gotten turned around somehow and stuck at the bottom. I had to find out. I wasted no time driving 2 counties over and renting some diving equipment along with a light. So armed, I returned to the pond and walked toward the middle again. This time, when I dove toward the dark spot, I was able to see exactly what it was. I used the flashlight to examine the darkness. As I swam deeper, the sides closed in on me as if I was swimming down the gullet of some massive fish. I'd never been claustrophobic before, but that was rapidly changing. I barely had any room to maneuver as the sides closed in. I contemplated turning around, but there was no room. I could feel myself starting to panic. I had to focus to keep my breaths regular. I was very close to a panic attack when suddenly the tunnel opened up again. The sides grew further apart. I checked my watch, and I'd been under for 15 minutes. The sides of the tunnel had spread out so far they were barely visible, and I could see a light ahead of me. I swam toward it, desperate to get out of this water. I broke through the surface and looked around. I was in the pond. Somehow I had gotten turned around and was back in the pond. I swam to the side until I could stand and walked out to the shore. Looking around me, I made a startling discovery. I was in a pond, the same one as the break-in last night. Somehow there was a hidden tunnel between the 2 ponds. That's how the robber never gets caught. He just swims to the next pond, slick as snot. No fuss, no muss. I now knew the how, but I needed to know more. As tempting as it was to swim back through the tunnel, I was still a little shaken and didn't want to risk an underwater panic attack. I walked back to my truck, took off my diving equipment, and I drove back to the dive shop. I asked about frequent customers, especially for refilling tanks. They told me they had a few regulars that came in every weekend, but no one knew, and no one who needed refill more than once a week. I asked if there were any other dive shops in the area, and they told me the next closest one was over 100 miles away. I went home frustrated. It wasn't making sense. He would need air to swim back and forth through that tunnel, and that was his escape route. I was sure of it. I tried to sleep through the afternoon, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. It was working on the impossible puzzle of how the robber was getting air. I borrowed a couple trail cams and set one up at each pond. I needed to see if he had some new tank system or what. I also wanted to identify him and shut him down fast. I made sure to stay away from those ponds that night, so he would feel free to do his thing. In the morning, I gathered the cameras and took them home. I downloaded both memory cards before watching the video. Just as the second download was finished, my phone rang. "Hello?" I answered. "Hey John, it's Steve. I got the results from that blood you gave me the other day." "Great," I said, hitting the play button on my computer. "Were you able to get a match on any hospital records?" "Not exactly," Steve said. "Why not?" I asked as a ghostly green image appeared on my computer. The image was blurred, but it was definitely the size of a man walking upright toward the camera. I clicked to the next slide and froze at what I saw. "Well, the thing is, the blood you gave me came back as reptile DNA." I registered the words he said in my mind, just like I registered the image on my computer screen. But I just couldn't place them in reality. "Are you there?" Steve said into the phone. "Yeah, I'm sorry," I said. "Could you send a copy of your findings to my office?" I asked. "Sure, no problem," Thanks, I appreciate it. You really helped me figure this out. Anytime, he said cheerfully before hanging up. I hadn't taken my eyes off the computer screen the whole time. No matter how long I stared at it, I couldn't make my mind acknowledge it was real. Standing there, large as life, was not a man in a wetsuit. It was a creature. I could see the mouth wide, full of sharp teeth that looked exactly like the bites on the deer. I could see the webbed feet that looked like swim fins, only they had claws sticking out of the front where the toes would be. I saw the razor-sharp claws on its webbed hands. It was a full-on nightmare staring me in the face. I sat back and thought for a long time. Then I printed copies of the images and put them in an envelope. I rushed to the station to share the information I had with my fellow rangers. As I was showing them, their faces ranged in emotions from shock to disbelief to outright mocking. As I was going through my investigation, the owner of the timeshares walked in. "What are we all looking at?" he said, eyeing me with contempt. "It seems like John has solved the case of the break-ins," one of the other rangers said. The owner approached. He picked up the lab report and read it, then stared for a long time at the picture. "Do you know what this is?" he said absently. "I really don't know yet," I replied. "I've never seen anything like it." He turned to me and smiled. "This is money," he said, holding up the picture. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Those idiots that go around hunting. What do they call them?" "Cryptids," I helped. "Yeah, cryptids. They'll pay through the nose if they think they can find something like this. And then there's the TV shows and merchandising," he said. "You may have saved my financial hide." He beamed at me. "I don't think you understand," I said. "This is a dangerous animal. If you had seen what it did to that deer." "So what do you want to do? Hunt it down and kill it?" He interrupted. "Maybe not kill it, but definitely tranquilize it and take it to a secure location where it can't hurt anyone." "You dumb son of a bitch," he yelled. "I could make a mint. I wouldn't even have to repair those houses. They would all rush in to investigate and leave piles of cash in my bank account." "But what about the people?" I continued. "Who cares about the people?" he said. "Throw them all out. I've got the chance of a lifetime beating down my front door, and you want to flush it down the toilet because you're scared someone might break a nail." He was breathing hard and staring up into my face. The air was charged with fury, his and mine, and then a sudden calm came over him. "Charles," he said, addressing the lead ranger, "isn't this a wildlife preserve?" "Yes, it is," Charles said warily. "And aren't the wildlife on this preserve protected from all tampering by law?" "Well, I guess so," Charles said. "What if those animals present a threat?" I said to Charles. "How many deer were killed by coyotes on this preserve last year?" the owner asked. "Dozens," Charles answered. "Were the coyotes removed from the preserve?" the owner continued. "No," Charles replied. The owner turned and shot me a triumphant look. "John," Charles said, "I know you have everyone's best interests in mind, but you're gonna have to let this one go." I glared at him. "And what happens when this thing decides it likes to eat humans?" I questioned. All the eyes in the room that had been on me suddenly found somewhere else to look. All but the owner. He was smiling from ear to ear. I think the pudgy little bastard was about to break into the happy dance. I searched the room for any support, but found none. I pulled my badge off my shirt, quietly laid it on the desk, and left. If that was the end of my story, I would say I had failed. I took my pension and rented one of the houses on the preserve. The owner had leaked through social media that a cryptid had been spotted on the preserve. As he guessed, the cryptid hunters and TV crews came in droves, renting everything in sight. My goal was different. I already knew it existed. I knew how it got around without being detected. I stayed at one of the break-in houses. Every night, I took a huge tuna I bought fresh that morning and laid it out beside the pond. I sat in the dark living room and watched the first night as it approached the fish with more caution than curiosity. After sniffing it for a long time, it grabbed it and dove for the pond. Each night after, I laid out a fish and the creature became less cautious. It was being fed and the media frenzy was starving. The hunters had found nothing. There were no sightings as long as I fed it. Everyone had their cameras set up. The few that roamed around left me alone when they saw someone in the house. I guess they thought I was another cryptid hunter and respected my privacy. As the number of sightings stayed at 0, they started turning on the owner, calling him a fraud. His reputation plummeted. After a week with no sightings, people started leaving. In desperation, he did the wrong thing. He hired an actor to dress in a creature suit and roam around. Of course, the hunters and shows saw right through this and destroyed what was left of his reputation. I had rented the house for 2 weeks. Between the rent and the fish, my money was running out. I had kept the people safe, but what would happen when I stopped feeding it? I had managed to clear out most of the people so they would be safe, but what about my fellow rangers? What would happen when it became desperate, when the starving creature no longer had houses full of food to break into? I had 3 more nights until I had to leave. I was out of money. The preserve had become a ghost town. As far as I knew, I was the only renter left. It was decision time. I sat, staring at the large tuna on the table with a bottle of bleach next to it. Let it live and see what happens, or kill it. I thought about this for a long time. Both options had merits and consequences. I chose a third option, a much more dangerous one. I took the fish out and laid it where I usually did. I then backed up a few feet and stood there. Over an hour passed before the water stirred. I saw the head and eyes of the creature appear as it headed toward the fish. And then it stopped. It had seen me. I made sure to keep still with my arms at my side. It slowly approached and stood. It was a few feet away with the fish in between us. It studied me and sniffed the air. Then it became agitated. Perhaps it smelled my scent before as a pursuer. It let out a soft hiss, but bent down and took the fish, keeping its eyes on me the entire time. Then, once it had its meal, it did the most incredible physical display I've ever seen. It leapt 20 feet into the air and landed in a perfect dive right in the middle of the pond, leaving almost no splash. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding in and collapsed to the ground, shaking. Once I'd recovered, I went back inside and fell into a fitful sleep. That was only part of my plan. The next night would decide who lived and who died. I did exactly like the night before, minus the fish. The creature approached, stepped up to me, and looked around for the fish. I showed it empty hands. It sniffed at them and growled, having smelled the scent of fish. It looked at my hands, and I wondered if it was going to bite them off as a substitute. It hissed at me and sniffed at my face. I saw it flexing its claws the whole time. I stared into its face, those massive razor-sharp teeth, and swallowed hard. I did all I could to stay still, to show it I wasn't a threat. My heart hammered in my chest, It opened its jaws and showed me those horrible teeth. Its breath was a horrid stench I'd never smelled and hoped to never again. I closed my eyes, not knowing if they would ever open. Seconds fell into minutes. I opened my eyes, and I was alone. There wasn't even a ripple in the water. I sighed. My decision had been made. It had shown restraint, and I would too. I went back inside, packed, and left. I could only hope and pray that the people that remained, including my former co-workers, Jefferson National Forest lies just north of Blacksburg, Virginia. My absolute favorite part of the forest is Pandabas Pond. The pond itself is scenic and beautiful, but the best part are the miles and miles of hiking trails accessible from the pond. I try to hike between 3 to 6 miles per week. I do this for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it's great exercise, and secondly, because it helps keep me sane. Today, however, the sanity part changed. Today, just like I do every week, I packed a few bottles of water and a collapsible water bowl for my dog, Lana, and headed for the pond. When I parked, I noted 6 or 7 cars in the parking lot and thought about how I'd for sure need to keep Lana close to me so we wouldn't bother any of the other hikers or pond-goers. I always turn on a hiking app on my phone, and as soon as I get out of the car, the app helps me gauge the distance I've hiked, and most importantly, it helps ensure I don't get lost. For any of you that may have knowledge of the area, you know it's borderline impossible to get lost on these trails, but I like to have the security. I got out of the car, shouldered my bag, grabbed the dog leash, and turned on the app. I was greeted with the familiar "start workout," and I began walking towards the pond. Everything seemed perfect. The temperature was cool, the sky was overcast, and for the first half mile, I was completely alone. As Lana and I rounded a bend, we saw another hiker. This hiker was a man in his early to mid-20s, and he was moving. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and he looked nervous. He wasn't running, but I doubted I would have been able to keep up with him. Lana and I stepped to the side to let him pass, and I offered a friendly "good morning." This guy never stopped looking ahead. He never even acknowledged my existence. As he passed, I pulled out my phone to get a video of his odd behavior, and noticed I had absolutely no service. My hiking app's GPS showed me standing still on a blank map. My mile-per-minute tracker had skyrocketed to 2 hours per mile and was steadily climbing. I turned the app off to save battery and decided I would just stick to trails I already knew. When I finally reached the pond, it was a ghost town. Usually there are older couples and moms push-jogging strollers around the pond loop, but today there wasn't a soul in sight. The combination of the deserted pond and the strange wide-eyed hiker was giving me an uneasy feeling, and for a moment I considered turning around and heading home. As I was standing there, contemplating what to do next, I felt Lana pulling enthusiastically on her leash. Okay, let's go, Lana Bear," I said as we moved forward. There's a section of the pond loop that forces you to cross a wooden bridge. The bridge separates the pond and a small section of marshland. Usually, when you cross it, you can hear bullfrogs bellowing and see ducks swimming around lazily. Today, though, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, nothing. I found it a little unnerving, but as we were so close to the trailhead, I decided to push on. We took our usual route, Lady Slipper Trail to Joe Pye Trail to Poverty Creek Trail. Usually once we hit Poverty Creek Trail, we take a right and head back to the car. But today was such perfect hiking weather that I decided to take a left and try a new trail I'd never been on before. I double-checked my location on a posted trail map and decided I would follow Poverty Creek to Royale Trail, then loop back towards the parking lot about halfway down Royale. As soon as I turned left on Poverty Creek, I experienced the worst case of vertigo I've ever experienced. I leaned on a low-hanging branch for a few minutes, trying to regain my composure. When I finally felt normal again, I decided to snap off that branch and use it as a walking stick, just in case the vertigo came back. The branch gave me a ton of resistance before finally coming off. However, it didn't make a sound. I stopped and stared at the branch that should have come off with an ear-shattering crack, and realized I couldn't hear anything other than my own breath. I looked up at the sky, barely visible through the canopy of the trees. The sky was a lot darker than when I first stepped onto the trail. I felt my heart start racing. Calm down. It just looks like it's gonna rain. That's why you don't hear any animals, I thought to myself. For some stupid reason, I decided to keep going. I could have, and most definitely should have, turned around, but I kept going and turned onto Royale Trail. After about 15 minutes of walking and hearing only the sound of Lana panting, I figured I should be close to the point where I could loop back around and get out of the woods. Another minute or two of walking presented me with a trail that headed in the general direction I needed to go. This trail was unmarked, unlike all the other trails. Whatever. Just get out of these woods before you get stuck out here in the rain. This I said out loud, mostly just to break the silence. This unmarked trail looked pretty well traveled, so I assumed I was okay. I assumed so very wrong. The trail quickly narrowed to nothing more than a deer trail, but as it was going the way I needed to go, I decided to follow it. The vegetation started to get really thick, and I had to duck my head so I didn't get hit in the face by stray branches. Barreling through the brush like I was should have been loud enough to wake the dead, but instead, I heard nothing but my own heavy breathing. Suddenly, I fell through the brush and into a clearing. On my hands and knees, I started to laugh at how shitty this hike was going and looked over at Lana. She was frozen in place. All of her hair was raised and her teeth were bared. She looked straight ahead and let out a low growl. I slowly looked up, hoping it was just a deer or a rabbit. Instead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood a man clad in camouflage. He was facing away from me with his head down. Lana growled again, and I saw the man's head perk up. "Run," he said, in a low, gruff voice. I ran, faster than I thought my feet could carry me, little Lana somehow matching my stride. As I silently crashed through the brush, I turned to see if the man was following us. He was. He wasn't running, but he still seemed to be gaining on me. Every time I looked over my shoulder, he was a little closer. I couldn't see his eyes, but he flashed an unnerving white smile as he gained on us. I knew I had to be close to 460, the highway that runs through the forest, and I knew if I could just make it to the pavement that I'd have a chance of making it home. "Run, little piggy," the man taunted just behind me. I saw the highway and changed direction. My legs screamed for me to stop, and every breath I took felt like broken glass was filling my lungs. I dove through the tree line and heard the man laugh as I crash-landed on the shoulder of 460. I scrambled to my feet and turned around, just in time to see the man melt back into the woods. The last part of him I saw was that white smile. As that too disappeared, the silence I'd been in for the better part of an hour stopped. The sound of passing cars and semi-trucks suddenly blasted me, and I realized I was safe. I looked around and got my bearings, and realized I was still at least 2 miles from my car. I started walking back towards the parking lot, making sure to keep ample distance between myself and the tree line. During breaks in the cars passing, I could hear twigs snapping and couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. I finally made it back to my car. I was shaking so bad, I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock the door. As I was closing my car door, I heard the man's eerie taunt again. "Run, little piggy." I've come to the decision that I will never hike there again. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great campsites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there are really shitty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along the roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the national forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that's more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we notice a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend, Isaac, decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I started talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh shit." A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We looked at each other and decided that maybe we don't need to see what that light was after all. We walked back in silence and kept looking back every few seconds. We decided to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cabin of the truck. Did you unlock it? We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all of our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnet fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I asked. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess, he responded. But you were walking around with a paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said that he'd been in the tent since we left and that he'd been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, All of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump in the F-150 and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but luckily it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off of it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way, just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again, though. When I first got the job, I couldn't believe my luck. I was a very solitary person. I loved to read and be alone. When I saw an ad for a park ranger manning a fire tower, I just about jumped out of my skin. Working overnight at Walmart wasn't exactly the best job in the world. There are some stories I could tell about that as well. But I applied for the job and was ecstatic that I got it. They made me do a week of training before my first shift. Most of it was dry reading and making sure I was qualified in CPR. They showed me the job's ins and outs, and then I followed in my car as we drove to the tower. In the middle of the day, it was awe-inspiring to stare up at the underside of the tower looming above me, suspended high in the air by metal pylons. Once I started climbing the narrow metal stairs with hints of rust at the edges, I was somewhat less than excited. In fact, I was terrified. I don't like heights very much. It's not like I go all vertigo or anything. It's just I prefer to stay on the ground. Once we reached the top and pushed open the trap door to get onto the deck that surrounded the tower, I was doing a bit better. I opened the door that led into the tower's interior. Looking around the room made me forget all about the terrible climb. It was like a small apartment. There was a small refrigerator, sink, counter, cupboards, and a small table. In the center of the room was a table with a map permanently attached to it. Of course, there were windows all around. There was a 360-degree view, as you would expect for a fire tower in the middle of a state park. The view was absolutely amazing. I could see the peaks and valleys for miles in every direction. It was a photographer's dream. The other ranger explained what was expected of me. We worked 24-hour shifts, so there would be times I would have to sleep. But I had to set an alarm and get up to scan for problems at least once per hour during the night. During daytime hours, I had to scan every 30 minutes. There was a radio to report any trouble and a phone in case I needed to call the fire department. In my mind, I was already drooling at the thought of getting paid to take amazing pictures and sit around reading books. The ranger told me that it was extremely important that I read the rule book first thing. He asked if I had any questions, and I said no. He reinforced that I could not leave the tower no matter what until I was relieved. I followed him down the narrow staircase to get my supplies from my car. He got in his truck and hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something else. But then he shut the door, wished me well, and drove away. It took me 3 trips to get all my stuff to the top. At home, it's nothing to bring a few boxes of groceries into the house. Here, it became life and death. I was near the top with a box in front of me when I stumbled on one of the narrow steps and nearly fell over the side. I paused for a long moment to regain my balance before continuing to the top. It suddenly struck me that this job might not be the cakewalk I thought it was. I pushed that thought to the back of my mind and went for my next 2 loads. Basic supplies, books, phone chargers, camera, occupied the second and last trips. Once I was up for good, I collapsed into the chair. I was on my way to Napland when I heard static on the radio. I jumped up and grabbed it. "Hello?" I said, but no one answered. I figured this was the ranger's subtle way of reminding me that it was time to do a check, but lugging 3 loads up the tiny stairs of death had put a serious crimp in my fire watch time. In fact, it had nearly been an hour since the other ranger had left. I did my slow pan around the room, checking each part of the forest for smoke and seeing none. Having successfully completed my first go-around, I celebrated with a bottle of water while I put the groceries away. The cupboards weren't empty, but they weren't a gourmet's delight either. Nearly a full shelf of baked beans didn't exactly thrill me, but I had the supplies that should do me for a few shifts. I set the bread on the counter and loaded the cold cuts in the fridge. I would get some more options the next time I went shopping. By the time I finished putting things away, it was time for another check. The sun was starting to set, so I grabbed my camera and took some amazing pictures. I couldn't wait to upload them to my computer at home. As I looked around the room, my eyes landed on the manual. I realized I hadn't read it yet. I sighed and took it over to the chair. I was sure it would have me out cold in no time. As I opened the book, a piece of notebook paper fell out. I picked it up and read. The real rules. Number 1. Never, under any circumstances, leave the fire tower until you are relieved. Number 2. Turn off all lights between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. Number 3. If you receive a radio transmission or phone call between those hours, do not answer. Number 4. If anyone knocks on the trap door during those hours, tell them they'll have to wait until morning. Do not open the door. Number 5. If you see a glowing object floating toward the tower, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. Number 6. If animals surround the tower, don't go down to look. Fire your flare gun into the air twice, 1 minute apart, then lock yourself in the bathroom and hope for the best. I sat the note down and stared at it. Was this a joke? Were they having fun with the new guy? I wasn't looking forward to getting hazed at 2 o'clock in the morning. I put the note back in the book and skimmed through the manual. It was a real snooze fest of standard rules and nonsense. For the next check, I decided to use binoculars. I was rewarded by seeing a bear and 3 deer. I pulled out my camera and took some pictures, but the zoom wasn't quite as much as I needed to get some really good shots. You could still tell it was a bear, but it was a little blurry. I decided to go camera shopping with my first paycheck. What's the use of having this spectacular view if I can't take good pictures of it? Soon after sunset came the twilight. The sky lit up a brilliant orange. I took some more pictures and did my scan. I was just about to go back inside when I noticed a thin wisp of smoke in the distance. I grabbed my binoculars and tried to get a better view, but there were too many trees in the way. I pulled out my compass and got a general direction, then grabbed the radio and called the ranger on duty. I told him I had a fire and gave him the direction and general distance. He acknowledged and said he would check it out. I stayed glued to my binoculars, waiting to see the smoke lessen. Minutes seemed to each take an eternity as the smoke continued to rise. Nearly a half hour later, the radio came to life. "Hey, rookie," the ranger said. "Did you find it? Did you put it out? I still see smoke. Did I tell you the wrong place?" I said into the radio all in one breath. "Whoa there," he said. "Everything's fine. It was just a campfire." "A what?" I asked. "A campfire," he said. "Nothing to worry about." "A campfire," I repeated in a daze. "Yeah, you'll want to see more smoke, and it should be a lot thicker and darker before you call it in." I stood in silence, my face beat red with embarrassment. "Cheer up," the ranger said into the silence. "At least you didn't call the fire department." I looked over at the phone, knowing I was mere minutes from doing that very thing. "Yeah, thanks," I said. "Sorry about that." "Don't worry, kid," he said. "At least you erred on the side of caution instead of letting the forest burn down." I put my face in my palm and shook my head. So much for a good first impression. Twilight had faded, leaving a few last vestiges of light as the clouds transformed from their dirty gray to black. I began to realize just how alone I was out here when the canopy of the night fully fell. Doing my checks from inside was nearly impossible. I had lights on, and every window I looked out became a mirror of me looking back in at myself. Alone, in a wooden box, suspended 100 feet above the ground, made it that much creepier. I stepped out onto the deck in the cool evening air. The total darkness was oppressive. I couldn't see anything. How was I supposed to see smoke? I did a slow walk around the deck, looking out blindly at the trees. As my eyes adjusted, I was able to make out some shapes of the mountains and even the soft glow in the distance of the nearest town. That was small comfort to know that things still existed out in the world, and I hadn't been plunged into this cover of darkness. I finished my check and stepped back inside. After being out in the darkness, it was way too bright. I turned off the main overhead light and the light over the entrance. The room settled into a comfortable glow with enough light to see, but not blind. In fact, it was a little too cozy. I felt a nap coming on. I laid down on the surprisingly comfortable cot and closed my eyes. I woke some time later to static sounding on the radio. I reached for the radio to answer it, but something in the back of my mind told me not to. I looked at my watch and it said 2:12 a.m. I froze, looking around the lit room. I thought about the strange rules I had read earlier. I reached up and turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. As my eyes adjusted and I could see a few things, I looked out the window and could swear I saw someone peering in at me. Just then, I heard static on the radio. There was a voice trying to get through, but it seemed too weak. I waited to see if they would call again. A minute later, static sounded again. Beneath it, I heard the voice. It was a little stronger this time. I could just make it out. "Help me," it said in a feeble yet insistent voice. I reached for the radio, but something made me glance at my watch first. It was 2:23 a.m. I faltered and didn't answer. Those creepy rules, I thought. What if they're real? I've already broken one by having the lights on. What happens when you break the rules? I sat in silence, wanting to know the answer, but at the same time not wanting to know. The radio call came through much more clearly this time. "Help me. Can anyone hear me? I need help." The voice sounded desperate. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It had a strange quality that I couldn't quite place. I fought the urge to answer, not knowing if I would be fired for dereliction of duty or not. This was what I was out here for. I needed to answer, but my mind just wouldn't let go of those rules. The minutes ticked by like hours. 3 more times the radio sounded out its plea, each time sounding more desperate. I watched the time, counting the seconds until 3. When the time finally came, I picked up the radio. "Whoever was calling for help, please state your position so I can relay help to you," I said. "Who is this?" came the answer on the radio. "This is a park ranger manning a fire tower," I replied. "Well, park ranger, I've been on this channel all night, and yours is the first voice I've heard," the person said. "That's not possible," I thought. "I had several calls for help over the last hour," I told him. "Are you sure?" he questioned. "Absolutely. I even wrote down the time of each call," I told him. "Then why didn't you answer them until now?" he questioned me. I paused. What could I say? Because a weird list of rules told me not to. "Ranger," the person said, trying to get my attention. I said hesitantly. "Extenuating circumstances." "Extenuating circumstances," the voice repeated, as though tasting them. "And what circumstances would those be?" he asked me. Whoever this was, they weren't going to let it go. "I'm not at liberty to say," I said. "You mean like falling asleep and breaking the rules?" the voice said, sounding deeper and raspier and more menacing. I froze. I hadn't turned the lights on yet, leaving the room in eerie darkness that left me feeling very exposed. I slowly panned around, looking out the windows and remembering the earlier feeling of being watched. "You can look all you want, but you won't see me," the voice said. "It's after 3, I said, hoping the terror I felt wasn't evident in my voice. "You have no power over me." The voice chuckled. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "Normally you would be correct. However, you broke the rules." "What if I didn't know about the rules?" I said, grasping at straws. "Nice try, but you knew that you should be safe after 3. Damn it, I thought. It picked up on that. "So what do you want?" I said, fearing the answer. "Hurry," the voice said. Only now it sounded like many voices speaking at once. "Come down and let us feed." My legs turned to rubber as I stumbled over to the door and stepped out onto the deck. The moonlight was rising half full, casting light into the darkness. I looked down and saw over a dozen large animals surrounding the tower in a circle, and each one of them was looking up at me. I dove back inside and locked the door. I frantically searched for the flashlight. Once I found it, I picked up the phone to call the ranger station. There was no dial tone. I hung up and tried again, but still nothing. I pulled out my cell phone, but there was no signal. I paused to clear my head. "Okay," I thought, "you're freaked out right now, but what's actually happened? A weirdo on the radio, some animals around the tower. This list is making you paranoid." Just then I looked outside, and there was light off in the distance that looked like an aeroplane. The problem was, it was headed straight toward me. It was mesmerizing. I found myself staring into the rapidly approaching glow until I realized it was going to ram into the tower. I found the best cover I could on the opposite side of the room and surrounded myself with as much furniture as possible. Being that the furnishings were sparse, that meant I dragged the chair over in front of me. I covered my eyes and hoped for the best. I may or may not have mumbled one of those, "I promise I'll be good if you get me out of this," prayers. The seconds tumbled into minutes. Nothing happened. I peeked over the edge of the counter, and the light was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief and wondered why I hadn't heard any engine sound. I decided it was because I was too busy ducking for cover. Then it hit me. I grabbed the manual and pulled out the list of rules. There it was, number 5. If you see a glowing object floating toward the tower, don't look at it. Close your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. I read over the rules again and realized how many had come to pass. For a long moment, I thought that maybe it was an elaborate joke, some of the rangers yanking the rookie's chain, but there was too much I couldn't explain. The radio transmissions, the glowing light, the animals surrounding the tower. Then I realized I'd broken that rule too. I had not fired the flare gun as instructed. I dug through the cupboard where the emergency supplies were kept and found the gun. I grabbed 2 flares and stepped out onto the deck. As I questioned the intelligence of firing flares that could end up causing a forest fire when I was supposed to be trying to prevent them, I heard a strange sound. I held my breath and cocked my ear for a better listen. It wasn't just one sound, it was many. I glanced over the side of the rail toward the ground and saw the animals all glowing and pawing at the ground, working themselves in a frenzy. I backed away and loaded the first flare, then pointed up and fired. It rose majestically, glowing blood red, until gravity slowed its ascent and pulled it back to Earth. I watched closely to make sure not only that it went out, but where it landed just in case. I waited a minute and fired the second flare, watching where it landed as well. I stepped back inside and hid in the bathroom as instructed. I knew in my heart that I was safe from the animals, as long as I didn't go down the steps. The radio sounded off, scaring me nearly half to death. "Fire tower number 5, the voice said. "Have seen your flares. I'm on my way. Are you physically injured?" The voice said. "No, not at the moment," I replied. "I'll explain when you get here." "Roger that. En route." I tried to calm my nerves by thinking about what job I would apply for next, and how unfortunate it was that this one didn't work out. I thought about what I was going to tell the ranger when he got here. I couldn't tell him the truth, but what else could I say? There were some animals at the bottom of the tower that scared me. I honestly considered calling him back and telling him not to come when I felt heavy footsteps on the bottom stairs of the fire tower. I must have been daydreaming and let time slip by. I stepped out of the bathroom and went to the trap door. "Are you here already?" I said into the radio as I reached down to unlatch the trap door. That was fast. "What are you talking about?" came the clear answer over the radio. "I'm not there yet." I paused as I felt the footsteps come closer to the top. "Where are you?" I said quietly. "I can barely see the tower. I'm probably a mile away." His words hit me like a sledgehammer. I looked down at the deadbolt I was about to unlatch and pulled my hand back very slowly. "Which direction are you coming from?" I asked. "Southeast," he replied. I looked in that direction, and sure enough, I could see headlights approaching. The radio sounded again, but with a slightly different voice. "Tower, ignore that last transmission," it said. "I'm already here. Let me in, please." I stared down at the trapdoor as though it wanted to bite me. "Tower, let me in," it said more insistently. I backed away as something began beating on the trapdoor with tremendous force. The board shook with every impact. I stepped inside and locked the door. I then barricaded it with my only loose piece of furniture, the chair. Tower 5, I don't know who's talking to you, but it isn't me. Do not open that door. Repeat, do not open that door." I backed into the bathroom with the flare gun in hand and locked the door. The pounding on the trap door became louder. I knew it wouldn't take much more of a beating. The whole room shook with every impact. I closed my eyes and prayed in earnest this time, and then my salvation came in the form of the engine sound of a pickup truck. I knew the real ranger was here. I listened as it came closer, then stopped. There was an awful silence for a moment, and then gunfire. Over and over, multiple shots in rapid succession. Then there was a lull, followed by more shots. The pounding on the trap door had stopped as soon as the truck pulled up. "The coast is clear, Ranger. You can open the door now," came a voice over the radio. I put my hand on the knob, smiling to go out and greet my savior, when I heard a weak transmission. "Don't. Not me," it rasped. A heartbeat later, the screaming began. It was a gut-wrenching scream of terrible suffering. I could hear it beneath me. All I could do was drop to the floor and curl up in a ball as the screaming went on and on. I closed my eyes and tried not to imagine that poor ranger being ripped to shreds by God knows what. Soon, the screams lessened in volume and intensity, as though they were moving away. I rocked back and forth, hugging my knees until unconsciousness mercifully took me. I woke to strange voices calling my name. I opened my eyes, and I was surrounded by people in blue uniforms. I panicked and backed away from them as fast as I could until my back hit a wall. "Calm down," one of them said. "It's all right." I looked around the room like an animal that had been backed into a corner. I was ready to fight my way out. "Are you injured?" he said. My mind raced to remember where I was. I looked out the window, and it was morning. The sun was shining, and I could see blue clouds. Everything from last night came back to me in a rush. I looked around the room and saw nothing out of the ordinary. "I'm not injured," I said to the EMT. "Can you tell us what happened here?" a ranger said from behind them. I looked over at the manual that contained the list of rules, and for a heartbeat, considered telling him to read them. "No," was all I said instead. "Can I go home now?" I asked. The ranger glared at me, wanting answers, and not getting them is frustrating, I know. "Is he all right to drive?" the ranger asked the EMT. They gave me the once-over. Blood pressure, lungs, heart rate, and didn't find anything to be concerned about. "I'd say physically he's fine," said the EMT. The ranger sighed. "Go ahead," he said, "but I'll want to talk to you tomorrow." I nodded and stood, gathered my things, and started toward the door. When I got to the open trap door, I hesitated, seeing it had been hacked open with an axe. I took a tentative first step, then another. Surviving a night as I had only to fall down several flights of stairs would be quite ironic. As I made my way down, white-knuckling the railing the whole way down, I saw people busy at the bottom. They were picking up shell casings with gloves and putting them into plastic bags. I could see spots of blood here and there, but no bodies, either human or animal. I saw the trail of blood as it disappeared into the woods. I stood on the bottom step for a long time, wondering if I was allowed to step onto the ground. I took the step and bolted for my car. I started it up and drove out of there as fast as I could. Just as I turned onto the gravel road, a deer walked out in front of me. I slammed on the brakes and slid to a stop mere inches from hitting it. It didn't move. It just stood there staring at me. As I looked more closely, I could see blood on its nose and mouth. My heart skipped a beat when I saw a shred of a ranger's patch impaled on one of its antlers. Its eyes bored into mine as I slammed into reverse, then back into drive, swerved around it, and broke every speed limit getting home. I called my boss and quit as soon as I got there. I then packed and started looking for a job in the city. Maybe I can find a nice quiet warehouse to guard. But if it has a set of strange rules, I'm walking out, no questions asked. So I've been sitting on this experience a while. I guess just not wanting to make a big deal out of nothing. But after reading some of the stories here and on other related subs, I would really like an answer to what I experienced. Back in about March of this year, I went camping with a friend, my boyfriend, and 3 dogs. My friend slept in his tent with his dog, and I slept in my tent with my 2 dogs and my boyfriend. My friend's tent was about 30 feet away from ours, and we were camping in the North Georgia mountains off an old Forest Service road. We were right next to a creek. For context, I'm an experienced backpacker, and I'm familiar with the usual nighttime sounds, like rustling in the leaves, sticks breaking, cicadas, that kind of thing. I have a lot of experience camping by myself, so it's rare that I get spooked out by anything other than other humans nearby, as I'm aware of the dangers of traveling solo as a woman. However, this particular night, I wake up in the middle of the night with a sense of absolute dread that I've never felt before. I check my phone and it's about 3:30 a.m. to 4 a.m. I really had to use the bathroom, and I was debating on whether I wanted to try to put my hiking boots on and venture outside to go, or just try to hold it until daylight. I didn't want to wake up the dogs, because if they heard me putting on my boots, they'd likely want to go outside to go to the bathroom as well. I'm still in the tent. That's when I notice it. It's almost like a hum, but not in the pleasant way where it's a tune or anything like that. It's a low-pitched hum that was reverberating through the campsite/forest and also through my body. It had 2 tones. It started with a relatively higher pitch and would switch to the relatively lower pitch after a period of time. Then it would start over without a break in the sound at all. It wasn't soft either. It felt like it was covering the entire wooded area we were in. It didn't sound like an animal, a person, a machine, or anything that I've ever heard. At this point, I absolutely cannot hold off on a bathroom trip any longer. I put on my hiking boots and quietly tell the dogs to stay put. My boyfriend is still sleeping. I unzip the tent and go outside. The entire campsite was covered in this spooky-ass fog, but it felt like it was my vision that was foggy, not the actual air. I couldn't see a damn thing. The 2-tone humming then got louder. I do my business maybe 5 feet from my tent, and I quickly nope the hell back to my tent and bury myself into my sleeping bag with a sweatshirt over my head to try and drown out or at least ignore the humming. The dogs raise their heads and growl a few times throughout this experience, but that isn't unusual for them when camping. I never saw any figures or lights in the woods, but I also was not looking for them and was trying to ignore the entire experience. Does anyone know what this humming could have been? I'm a singer, so late nights are common for me. This night, I was driving myself and 4 bandmates home from a show. It's about a 2-hour drive. We're jamming out to the radio and talking and everything is fine, until I get to the road that's over a big lake in our state. As soon as I hit that bridge, I felt uneasy. I didn't want to look like a weenie, so I didn't say anything to everyone else, until I saw the guy walking on the shoulder of the bridge, which is practically non-existent. I swerve a little to miss him, and the guys start asking if I was okay and why I swerved. When I said it was to miss the guy, everyone says, "What guy?" So I described him. He had on a dark jacket, camo cargo pants, dark shoes, and wet hair. No one saw him, and they laughed it off. I saw him again just a few feet ahead and pointed him out, but no one sees him. I'm freaking out because he's there. A few miles ahead, I see him again. This time my drummer sees him too, and he said I wasn't kidding and describes his face because he turned this time. He described exactly what I saw. I started driving faster, and he showed up every few miles. He'd turn his head and grin this scary-ass grin. I almost started crying. Anyway, once we got to the woods past the bridge, I thought we'd be fine, but he kept appearing until we got close to town. Then he was gone. I've never seen him again. That was one of the scariest ghost encounters I've had. His hair and clothes were wet, so I'm guessing it was the spirit of someone who drowned in the lake and is sticking around to mess with people. But he scared me pretty bad. This happened in 2011, and I was in my 20s. I live really close to James A. Reed. It's a memorial wildlife area of a little over 3,000 acres. It's a popular location for fishing because it has something like 12 small lakes. It's also popular for hiking, as there are numerous hiking trails that traverse the entire area, all of which are light hiking and nature walking sort of trails. It's a popular spot for photographers for shooting portraits, and during hunting season, it's popular for bow hunting. I'm an amateur photographer, I guess. I do portraiture for a side gig. I like to fish, and I also like to go hiking, so it's basically one of my favorite places, and I go there really often. I basically broke into portraiture photography by shooting school photos and couples and such at this location. It has fields with tall grass, great colors in the fall, docks, and easily accessible changes in scenery. It's basically a photographic gold mine. I still do photography, but I'm quite a bit better known at this point, and obviously significantly better than I was then. But I still use James A. Reed as my go-to location for almost everything. Boy Scout troops also go hiking through the area on nature walks and such. It's just a very popular area. In the summer of 2011, the body of a 19-year-old guy was found at the wildlife park. The story of this kid's body was a minor news story, but since I was so familiar with the area, it was of interest to me. The news report was immediately confusing. According to the report, the kid had been partying with some friends and he OD'd at the party, and the story breaks apart here. His friends say that he wandered off and they didn't know where he went. His mother thinks, for no clear reason, and this is the operating story that the news went with, that he OD'd at this party and his friends dumped his body in the wildlife area in the middle of the night. Both of these things are pretty much impossible, and I'll explain exactly why right now. The article mentioned which lake his body was found near. It was Bodark Lake, which is pretty much the farthest lake from the entrance to the park that you can get. Getting to this particular lake requires driving down about 1.5 miles long paved road that hasn't had any service in at least 2 decades. This thing is riddled with potholes that are car killers. If you don't know where they are, you have to take the road slow. Hitting one of these things in anything short of a full-sized pickup will likely destroy your tire and wheel. I've driven it so many times I have the potholes memorized, and I can drive it pretty normally, weaving in and out of them when they come up. But in the dark of the night, this would be hard, especially for some drunk and high teenagers. but that in and of itself isn't impossible to do. There are 3 gates between the entrance and where his body was found. One at the driveway leading into the park, which is one of the largest swinging steel gates. The next gate is just after that one. In order to get to Bodark, you need to make an immediate right-hand turn after the visitor center, and that is where you run into the 10-foot-tall chain-link fence that's meant to keep the deer in the wildlife area. This fence runs the entire perimeter of the reserve as it's right off of a highway, and they want to make sure the deer stay there for hunting season. You need to get through a second chain-link fence gate that's chained shut every night. The park opens at sunrise and closes at sunset. After you go through the gate, you get on the previously mentioned paved road for about 3 minutes and come to what they constitute as the ranger station, but it's really just a big parking lot. From here, there's another giant fence gate that's chained shut at night. After you're through that gate, you're in the clear to get to Bodark Lake. The trail near Bodark is particularly scenic, and I've used it countless times for photo shoots. It's also a good walk through nature. So, the next day, my girlfriend and I decided we would go check it out. See if we could find where they found the body. I know, it's disrespectful, but we were gonna go there anyway, so why not? Well, we did find where they found the body. We know this because the police tape was still there, but it was one fuck of a chore. In order to get to where the body was found, you had to start on the trail near Bodark, but about 5 minutes into the walk, go completely off the path and through the trees and brush, down an extremely steep slope that goes downward about 20 feet, and cross through the stream at the bottom. The stream was about 3 to 4 feet deep as it was running high, though the water doesn't move very fast. The only reason we knew where we were going was because the original trail was high enough up that through the trees we caught the glint of the yellow caution tape way in the distance. When hiking, we both wore a pair of Vibram hiking shoes that didn't have trouble with water. But the water was still deep, and we didn't particularly want to go swimming. So we walked upstream for quite a while until we found a section that was thin enough to jump across. And then we walked back down the stream to where we had been to continue in the direction of the caution tape, which we could no longer see now that we were on level with it. After a few more minutes of trudging through particularly thick brush and forestry, we finally arrived at the second stream, on the other side of which was the roped-off area of police tape. The actual taped-off area was pretty small, so we were able to tell pretty much exactly where the body was found. It was on a pile of rocks right on the other side of the stream. We didn't cross this stream because we'd found it, and that was good enough. There was nothing to see. We'd gone from a Class 0 nature walk to a Class 2 to, at times, Class 3 hike getting here. There was absolutely zero possibility of any drunken teenagers carrying a human body this far into the wilderness in the middle of the night. And this is after they bypassed the 3 gates, which were never reported to have been broken into at all. This kid was way off the beaten path and was very literally in the middle of the wilderness. It was so remote that his body was there for a couple of days before anyone found it. I've done a lot of hiking, and even completely sober, in the middle of the day, this was a serious challenge to get to. It's equally impossible that he just wandered away from some party in the middle of the night and found himself here. There are houses along the highway across from James A. Reed, most of which are farms. And if you go a couple of miles down that highway, you do find a residential area. But the notion that he got fucked up wandered miles down the road, hopped 2 10-foot fences, walked a mile down a barely paved road, went into the forest, crossed 2 deep streams, sat down on a pile of rocks, and decided to OD in the middle of the forest is equally, if not more, unlikely. So, what happened to him? I don't know. I think it's a lot more likely they went into the forest during operating hours and all started doing drugs in the middle of the forest, and they left him where he died. But still, this is a massive stretch. I cannot stress to you the difficulty of getting to this location. Anyway, why is this in the paranormal Reddit? It should be on the "this sounds like some really bad police work" board. But I'm getting there, I swear. So we started our retreat back to the actual trail, climbing through trees and brush, which was now significantly more difficult because we were going uphill, back to the first stream, and after that, it was a steep incline, which was definitely going to require grabbing trees and getting firm footholds, and some teamwork. But before we got that far, we had to trek back upstream to get to the point where we could jump across it, and right here is where it went fucking weird. As we're following the stream up, we stop dead in our tracks, as a middle-aged man in a full business suit was just walking in the stream. He was a tall guy. The water came up to right around his chest. He was in a white dress shirt, a black blazer, black tie, and he had a briefcase in his hand that he was kind of letting float behind him. He was walking downstream, so coming directly towards us, but he paid us no mind. We both just stopped and stared at the guy, and then at each other as if to silently say, "What the fuck?" And both of us backed up as he got closer to us. He passed us by without saying anything or even looking in our direction. He was bald, white, probably around 45 years old, and fairly broad. He had a completely blank expression, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He had these massive bags under his eyes, which were completely dead. His expression was just dead, slightly slack-jawed, eyes glossed over. It's worth noting that he was dry from the chest up, like he just entered the water and started walking downstream. He was just walking straight down the stream, very slowly. We just stood there, completely silent, staring at this guy until he passed us by, and we were now looking at the back of his head as he marched forward. He could have easily exited the water at any point here. The embankment wasn't difficult, but he just soldiered on down the stream. We now moved way faster than we safely should have been, running upstream to jump across and get back on the trail and to our car, which is where we drove off, and both immediately started asking each other, what the fuck was that? We tried to tell our friends about this experience, but it was beyond even really conveying how weird it was. I don't even think I can properly put it into text to give you the proper context as to how eerie it was. It was just dead silent in the forest, or at least it seemed that way. All we heard was him sloshing through the water as he slowly made his way downstream to wherever the hell he was going. I expected to read about another body being found, like this guy was off to end himself in the forest or something, but no such news article ever appeared. But the vibe he gave off, like man, I really can't explain the feeling that seeing this guy gave us. It was like overwhelming dread, confusion, and I'm sure some terror. I don't even know how to explain the emotions we were feeling. We both agreed we didn't even have words for it. It was a totally foreign feeling. Anyway, I don't really have any other notable paranormal experiences. I don't know about ghosts or any of that. So I'm asking, out of curiosity, what the hell do you think we came across out there? I know I probably didn't need all the backstory to the dead body, but it's a weird case that locals generally feel was not sufficiently answered, because anyone familiar with the area and location will tell you exactly what I just did. That both accounts of how he got there are basically impossible. So were the body and the businessman in the river related? Or did we just stumble upon something else while out looking for the location? Who or what do you think this guy was? I want to tell you it was just a guy randomly walking down a stream of disgusting murky water in a business suit, because weirder things have happened. But I can't shake the feeling that this guy gave off. What do you think?